Okay, so then there is a third paper, came out a year after the rebuttal, or maybe a couple months after the rebuttal. And they said, hey, we think we can solve the transduction problem. They still call it simple grounding, I guess. And the idea was to use unsupervised learning to learn the digits. And then they had an additional loss function to account for accuracy in the digits, or additional loss term rather, sorry. And then they also had this additional kind of proofreader layer to improve performance. I don't think I'm going to cover that here though. That's just kind of like an additional optimization. Okay, so the idea here is that the pre-trained encodings of the input is related to the label encodings of the actual digits through some permutation matrix P. So this is kind of the beginnings of their theory on how they improve the loss function. So that means that the final results permutated on P, you should still recover the same label encoding. So their idea is they're going to do this kind of two-phase training. So first is freeze the digit classifier, and they're going to train the weights with a special loss function that allows also to learn an initial permutation matrix P. And then upon the convergence of P, they're going to stop training with this initial phase. Now they're going to freeze P, and now they switch to the traditional loss function, the cross entropy, to actually learn the weights. So the idea is by learning P, that's essentially what's allowing this mapping from the digits, the perception level to the symbolic, and then once you feel that that's converged, then go to this. Now the unsupervised learning is, really that's what's designed to get your first pass and identify if there's actually, different objects in the picture. Now the one thing with the unsupervised learning is they still had a little bit of knowledge on that there were 9 different digits. So, and also bear in mind that they're only having to recognize, one digit in each of those little images. So this is already, pretty complicated thing to address this transduction problem, and even just a simple case of Sudoku. So this should be kept in mind, I think, as we think about building these systems with more and more layers and doing different things, what the challenges could be. Especially, we talk about things like a couple lessons ago, logical tensor networks that, do a lot of learning around the weights associated with the tensors, which is where you get your atomic propositions from. Is it going to be enough in a situation where perception's a big deal in your problem, where you could just learn those weights? Or will you have to do something like this? And honestly, I just don't think enough work has been done yet to fully answer that. So, the good news is they pretty much recovered the original results. So they, got fairly high accuracy, even in the visual case. And here they talk about grounded versus ungrounded, the availability of the data. one thing also to note here is I do believe that this implies that the overall approach could still probably stand room for improvement, because I believe this is higher than what the original paper cited for the theoretical best of 75%. Probably kicks it up to a couple percentage points. Yeah, questions?
So there were, like, I guess there were two issues with the original set paper. One was label leakage, and the other was that it was sensitive to initialization.
Mm-hmm.
This third paper solves the label leakage problem, but does it also solve the initialization problem?
I don't believe, I'd have to look at the supplemental, honestly.
Yeah.
That's a fair question. So anyway, I mean, just some concluding thoughts. I mean, look, the original SatNet paper, yeah, it had its flaws. And I think these are important lessons to remember, especially for anyone doing neural net research. Because, you know, the authors of the second paper, I mean, someone in that team had a feeling that, hey, you know, this whole transduction or symbol grounding thing, I don't think they solved it that easily. And they noticed, you know, that it was actually leaking that labeled information. They tested it out. You know, do I think that paper would have gotten accepted without that visual result? Probably. I don't think it, you know, would it have gotten nominated for best paper still? That's, you know, unknown. But you know, just to keep in mind though, especially as you do your own work, you know, thoroughness and experiments, chance hyperparameters that give a good result. You know, there might be someone out there who will look to replicate your stuff, and that can be problematic if you're rushing. And the whole thing about the initialization of weights, there are complaints about the training method. If you look at that second paper, I mean, they have a lot of stuff in there that they study about various aspects of the hyperparameters and so forth. And you know, this case, because the original SatNet paper had such, you know, important claims, that it led to the second paper getting published. But you know, how often are things not that thorough in the experiments? How often are hyperparameters or training method maybe, you know, gamed in a little bit weird way? Does that go on? And then this is, I think, where, you know, my interest lies in the whole thing. I mean, you know, between these three research groups, a lot of work went into this, and you know, they still don't totally solve the problem, honestly. Okay, I mean, they're getting like 65%, you know, accuracy, and you know, MNIST, that stuff has been around since the late 80s. You know, you'd think by now, anything with handwritten digits, we should be able to solve just as good as with regular numbers, but this is clearly not the case. And what happens when we care about things that are more complicated? So, you know, I think this raises important questions to think about, especially in the context of end-to-end systems. And, you know, this whole thing about learning constraints seems like SatNet kicked off some people thinking about this problem. There have been some more recent papers in the last year on this. I've posted a couple of them. One by Nolan Tomby's group, kind of interesting. And I thought it was kind of neat to see him look at the problem, because knowing what those guys do with game theory, you know, there's a lot of game theoretic problems that rely on modeling and adversarial scenarios in your program. So wanting to learn the constraints would be kind of the natural thing to use a learning method for. All right, well, that about wraps up for today. Any final questions?
Regarding transduction, in that case, we had a set of 0 to 9. We told the network that okay, you need to learn labels between 1 to 9, and then it learned the labels. That was the unsupervised part.
Right, well, the unsupervised part was just saying, hey, there's 1 of 9 objects in each of these pictures. And so that's what the unsupervised thing was learning. So it just says, okay, here are symbols, A through I, just giving them a letter. And then converting that into a number is then, or the relationship between those numbers is essentially what the permutation matrix is for.
Yep. The constraint that we learned are the clauses that we learned. Essentially, the rules of Sudoku is limited to 3 rules. Is that what they encapsulate in all those clauses?
So, like, what all the.
Yeah, so we know from the structure that we learn something which is very symbolic and not just a black box thing that we learned. That's
Right.
what the whole before was about.
Yes.
But we never get to know that what we actually learned. We just saw the output.
Right, we know there were like 600 clauses.
Yeah.
And they never like list them out in paper, what they are. But it's probably all about, different combinations of numbers that can be placed in parts of the board and stuff like that, just setting constraints on it. So, and that can also be, well, and 2, those logical constraints, they have an equivalent constraint for the associated optimization program that can be expressed, just like any other constraint. And so those rows in the matrix is what gets learned essentially. Yeah.
Can you so with a differentiable SAT solver, can you basically use this for any other problem that compiles to SAT or that reduces to SAT? Just about anything, right?
Well, so yeah, I guess the the question would be, how many variables are we talking about? And how many clauses are acceptable? But I mean, those issues aside of the scale of the problem, yeah, it could, but I don't think it's going to be. I don't think this particular work, at least in today's hardware, is going to be useful for problems of very large scale.
I have 2 questions. So the first one would be the total accuracy will be around 65, right? You said that. And then I was wondering, it's based on what kind of factor that causes that only 60%? Is that the recognition part or is the inference part?
Was clearly the recognition part because they show even in the masked case that they're getting 97%.
And the second question will be, is that for any kind of a combinational problem that we can use and or this kind of a structure to solve it very efficiently? Or it's based on the case that we have what kind of a hyperparameters?
Well, I think that's a fair question, right? The most thorough experiments around SATnet, at least for these 3 papers, were all on Sudoku. And there was one other, in the first paper, there was one other SAT problem, I forget what it was. It was something really simple and borderline trivial that they do just to, as an initial experiment. And so I think it's a fair question to ask. It's are these max SAT hyperparameters or Sudoku hyperparameters? I don't think we know the answer to that. Other questions? All right, well, that'll do it for today. Thanks much.